Man, that boys video took so long for me to get through. I swear, if I don't see another messed up image again for the rest of my life, it'll be too soon. Maybe I should try for something a little safer this time. For fun! I just wanted to rewatch Willy Wonka. If there's an author I've always just loved the adaptations of for as long as I can remember, it has to be Roald Dahl. I mean, sure, I grew up with stuff from other authors, Dr. Seuss, Jeff Kinney, Louis Sachar, R.L. Stein, but none of them had that same mark of quality I felt watching a Dahl one. And honestly, even before I could tell what a Dahl film was, I was already a fan of them thanks to my dad, who introduced me to him through Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So he never seemed to mind when I just watch it and the Depp one back to back as a kid literally all the time. And coincidentally, my grandma also had a DVD of James and the Giant Peach lying around, plus I just randomly stumbled across Matilda and loved it, so yeah, I was pretty big into Dahl before I could even read his name in the credits, and I don't think that was all purely by chance, cause like, there are authors whose style bleeds through by their word choice or genre. You know, you're never gonna think of a Seuss book or a Stein book as being somebody else's by mistake, but Dahl didn't have that kind of uniformity. He didn't just write horror or fantasy stories, he didn't stick purely to kids' books or traditional trademarks just to tell you it was his. Sometimes they'd have action, sometimes they had songs, sometimes they were big and sometimes they were small, but they always had one thing in common: their tone. Since, on one hand, Dahl was this playful kid at heart who loved writing stories about beating authority and found family, but on the other, he was this bitter old asshole with a shit childhood who sort of just stumbled into making kids' books completely by accident. So it led to his work having this particular style to it I call drunk uncle storytelling. Because, like, it usually starts with the stuff you'd expect from most fairy tales. A narrator, magic, wonder, hope, creativity, all that type of stuff he heard growing up. But since he's not really cognizant enough to be careful with his wording, sometimes there's a cynical comment or a scary plot point that makes you feel shocked and weird. But also, it's kinda indescribably real in a way you'd never get from the average adult if they were telling it sober. There's something inherently unpretentious about it. You don't feel like you're being talked down to as much. And that's why I made it a mission after watching them to become an alcoholic. So they might write a book about a smart little girl who learns telekinesis, but it'll be in the context of her fighting an abusive principal who's all but confirmed to be an actual fucking murderer. Or he'll write a book about a shy, lonely orphan who meets a big, friendly giant that gets picked around by 9 bigger giants who search the world each night devouring kids. The name of the game for Dahl was mixing whimsy with cynicism, and weirdly it worked really well to bring out the best in both of them when he balanced it right. But don't get me wrong, it was a fragile balance. The type that if it was knocked off even an inch out of place, it could lead to the whole thing feeling completely off or un-Dahl-like. And hey, lucky for me, would you look at that, because there've been so many adaptations of his work over the last 50 years, I can pretty much show that full spectrum and more by going through them all from good to mixed to bad to tell you what works and what doesn't. Which means I have to read 9 books and watch 14 movies. Shit. 1 month of work and 5 months of procrastinating later. Alright, I'm ready. Oh, what was the 5 months of procrastinating about? Side quests. And speaking of, have you guys ever wanted to take some side quests into the realms of the internet beyond your region? Well, if today's sponsor ExpressVPN, you can do exactly that. Now, I probably don't need to tell you what a VPN is. I'm sure you already know it encrypts your data from ISPs and shady public Wi-Fi owners while letting you cross the world online by making it seem like you're in another country, and you probably also know you can use it to get unrestricted access to stuff on streaming services that might not be available or even censored in your current country. But let me tell you why I use Express, since I've actually had it as my personal VPN for over 3 years now, and that's because it just has some of the best specs of any VPN on the market. It's reliably fast, you can pair it with a bunch of different devices on one subscription, and most importantly for me as someone who values his privacy, unlike certain other VPNs that might secretly sell your data, ExpressVPN is so secure, they've made it impossible for their servers to log anything, and they've got independent audits from other companies to prove it. So for me, it really does feel like the most secure possible experience. Plus, now that it's got tiered pricing, you can sign up for as low as $3.50 a month. And if you want to figure out how you can get up to 4 months extra, feel free to click my link in the description, scan the QR code on screen, or just go to expressvpn.com/juststopyt. Thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring, and back to the... Yeah, so this probably isn't the first thing you think about when you imagine great Dahl adaptations, but I feel like it'd be kind of weird to start off with anything else, seeing as this is the only one Dahl personally ever lived long enough to say he actually liked. Not that whether he liked the thing or not has anything to do with how I feel about it. I mean, the guy apparently hated Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which... I'll get to, but I totally see why I love this one, since it's by far the most faithful adaptation of his work, at least as far as taking things from the page to the screen, which is honestly really impressive, seeing as the first thing I thought when reading the novel was this would be hard to turn into a movie. Not because the story's just inherently uncinematic by nature or anything, it's an engaging read, but damn, a lot of it is just two characters talking. Like, one of the big things with Dahl's children's stories is he loves writing curious kids who always ask questions so another character can explain something, and from a narrative angle it makes sense. It's a really easy way of naturally delivering exposition, but the one where he pushes that idea basically to the limit is BFG, since about 70% of it is just the orphan girl Sophie asking questions about giants and BFG giving answers, and it works in the context of the book since they're both charming characters with a good dynamic, not to mention the answers actually end up playing a part in the climax that makes them feel satisfying in retrospect, but there is a pretty big advantage there in that a lot of what goes into reading books is using your imagination. So when BFG spends pages and pages talking about how dreams work or what he can do to catch and manipulate them, you're invested because it gives you these vivid descriptions and fun details for a system that's so wonderfully original. But when you translate all that talking to the screen, you gotta think, how are they gonna do that? They've gotta use a specific visual to demonstrate the scene, so what's the right play here? Do they come up with their own sequences to keep it engaging at the cost of sacrificing the viewer's imagination, or do they just let the characters talk with the chance it could get boring if all we see is two characters yapping in a room? There's some real drawbacks that come with both ideas depending on how they play it, and I think this makes the right call by going with the latter, since the BFG is, first and foremost, a character-driven story. The selling point is watching this shy little girl empower an old giant with big emotions to stand up for himself and help in whatever way he can. In a way, you could even say it's sort of like a children's version of 12 Angry Men, since in a screenwriting sense, it breaks one of the main basic rules, that being don't spend too much of it with characters just talking in the same location, but you don't mind it here since the discussions they're having are fun. The ways they're bouncing off each other as characters are unique and interesting, and it's elevated by just some great voice direction, occasional music, and really strong character animation, which does so much to give their conversations personality without ever feeling forced or like it's jingling keys to keep your attention. It's extremely subtle, but it works exactly how it's intended, and when they do need to go for something more dramatic or ethereal, like showing off the size of the giants or BFG collecting dreams, it knows just as well how to be super big and show-stopping, so there's this real feeling that it only ever shows you what it needs to get the effect it's going for. Nothing's wasted, something that probably had to be done to stay in the budget of a British TV movie, but it's done with so much class you can't help but love it. And another thing that's impressive is just how much of it they're able to keep. Like, seeing as it's one of Dahl's longest books with such an emphasis on dialogue moments specifically, I was ready for this to be crammed full of content or missing something important, but they find a very comfortable middle ground that keeps pretty much everything without being rushed. They even fit in an original song about BFG's explosive farts. Look, don't question it makes sense in the story. Okay, no it doesn't. Dahl just snuck in some weird shit from time to time, but it's surprisingly kind of tasteful for a scene of his farts being so strong they lift him off the ground. There's no stink clouds or gross sound effects, or, and this is just me thinking out loud, something like corgis farting across Buckingham Palace. Not sure why that came to mind. I guess I just couldn't handle it if it did have those things. But I guess that just goes to show what can happen when Brits are the ones who adapt his work, which, yeah, for a British author, weirdly doesn't happen that much. And I can't help but feel like that tends to have an effect on what ends up getting made. I mean, granted, I like fucking around with Brits as much as the next guy. Actually, hold on a sec. Hey, Tunchi, guess what?
Yo, what happened?
You're British! I got him! Classic. Anyway, I take the piss out of Brits as much as the next guy, but to give them some credit here, they wouldn't have made the twats. I mean, the tits. I mean, the one where the guy's ass explodes. Like, if there's one thing I'll give the few British-made Dahl movies, it's that they're not overly noisy or in your face, at least consistently. That's what James Corden's there to do. Don't worry, we'll get to that one. And probably not where you'll think it'll be, but really, if there's one thing I appreciate about BFG over everything else I'm gonna talk about today, it's that it matches Dahl's calmer side in a way nothing after it ever seems to do again. And that helps it stand out a lot aside from just how faithful it is. Although faithfulness isn't the only thing that makes a good adaptation, since, like I said, sometimes it's not just about crossing mediums, but nationalities. I mean, you'd think it wouldn't be that hard since we literally speak the same language and come from the same place, technically, kinda, but it's not a stretch to say Americans just aren't great at adapting British things. And buddy, we fucking tried. Just look at what we did to Doctor Who, Wicker Man, Dougal, fucking Dougal. And that's not even mentioning some of the films in this video. Do I need to play the ass explosion clip again? Because I will. Eventually. And honestly, just taking Matilda at face value, it doesn't feel like it would work that well in America either, since it's very rooted in Dahl's own childhood growing up at a boarding school. He based the main villain, the Trunchbull, on real headmasters who beat his ass all the time. There's a no-joke, genuine, real kid in it with the name Bruce Bogtrotter. Like, if Sophie didn't literally team up with the Queen of England in BFG, I'd say it was probably his most proudly British book ever. So localizing it for Americans, especially in the 90s, sounds kinda terrible, but it finds that right balance by, first of all, using some actually decent analogs for the British stuff. Matilda's parents are these stingy rip-off artists who watch TV all the time? Easy, they're from Jersey now. The narrator's a sarcastic guy with a dry sense of humor? Easy, he's Danny DeVito now, and he's also the parent too, for some reason. That's not gonna be confusing. Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey, lives in a rundown shithole because after her aunt the Trunchbull murdered her dad and took the inheritance, she'd only give her £1 a week, meaning that was the only place she could rent to live independently? Easy. Now she lives there because she's an American teacher. For real though, they make that transition shockingly well without going too overboard on changes, and it helps a lot in making the more Hollywood elements feel a little less jarring, since okay, there's some pretty obvious bits for Americans here. It's got loads of those extra cheesy music choices, montages, over-the-top sound effects, and pog-face reaction shots, but thank fuck, it's kept in check by how it can instantly go from that sickly sweet, jolly commercial vibe to straight-up Lynchian horror, and yes, I'm using that term correctly, because this thing knows how to make you uncomfortable. There's one scene where a kid has to eat maybe the most delicious-looking cake I've ever seen in my life, and they're able to frame it like it's the most horrible thing you could ever force someone to do. You feel how bloated this kid's getting trying to scarf down bite after bite, and you get that same sort of uneasiness whenever a character gets a close-up, since half the time they don't look like they're mean-mugging the camera, they look like they're about to eat it. It's almost claustrophobic at times. You can just feel how much Danny's using his knowledge from the dark comedies he directed, and combined with the localizations, it leads to this experience that still feels like Dahl in its tone and execution, but cranked up to fucking 11. So those shades of light and dark are as balanced as ever, they're just way more big and exaggerated than ever before, and for one character particularly, that works to make for one of the best villain performances in Dahl, kids, just overall movie history, the Trunchbull. And it could have gone wrong very easily, because the thing about Dahl's villains is that just like the tone, they tend to be these really exaggerated cartoon characters, but always with a big dose of realism that makes them especially scary. And the Trunchbull might be his magnum opus, since on a comedic level, she's this huge ox of a woman who gives out ridiculous punishments for the smallest things and violently hates kids despite being a principal. But then there's that realism in how, oh shit, she's not only a murderer, she's also so abusive to the kids that the parents just don't believe it when they tell them. I mean, it's intentionally ridiculous with how she chucks girls by their uncut pigtails over fences or javelin throws kids who eat during lessons out the window, but just that idea of your parents not believing you when there's legit something awful happening is so realistically scary from a kid's perspective. So if they were going to crank her up even more for the film, they had to make sure they didn't push it too far in one direction or they'd lose the effect, but whew, they did not, and it makes Trunchbull one of the most batshit insane villain characters ever. In the book, she was an intimidating beast who loved using her strength to lord over anyone weaker than her. In the movie, she's the fucking juggernaut, a woman who can lift up a car with her bare hands, a woman who can leap from a second-story balcony and land like the ground's getting hurt, a woman who's got so much ego she openly calls herself God of the school. She's such a unit they added a whole sequence of her chasing Matilda through her house just to show that if she wanted to, she could kill you, and she loved doing it. One line I couldn't believe was original is when Honey tries standing up to her for once, and Trunchbull says, "I broke her arm once, I could do it again, Jenny," like she's reliving her favorite childhood memory, which just so happens to be an adult memory of breaking her niece's arm as a kid. I can 100% imagine this woman building something like the Chokey, a small box with nails sticking out of it and broken glass on the floor for kids she especially hates, with all the conviction of that guy who built the Killdozer. It's not just something she revels in, it is her life purpose. And because of that, I can get behind how they play with Matilda's telekinesis here, even if it's not technically the most accurate. See, there's a misconception thanks to this movie that the mind power stuff is way more prominent than it is in the book, but there's really not that much of it, and what she can actually do is comparatively super limited. She doesn't ever blow up TVs or maneuver little girls like airplanes after the Trunchbull throws them, she just knocks over a glass of water and levitates some chalk, and both of those things take a lot of effort from Matilda, since in the more grounded world of the book, her power powers are treated like the amazing phenomenon they are. It's described as her hatred of injustice manifesting into millions of small, invisible hands that, if she uses all her focus and effort, she can stretch just long enough to pick up small objects for a couple of seconds. It takes days of effort and practice just for her to keep something in the air long enough to move it around, so her being able to hold it out for long enough to write a message posing as Trunchbull's murdered brother is this huge moment in the book, but for a film adaptation as batshit as this one, hovering chalk doesn't feel all that big. So I can accept them making her power so much stronger for the sake of this satisfying climax where the Trunchbull gets haunted like a Hitchcock sequence and runs away humiliated as kids throw their trash at her. Is it Hollywood? Yeah, completely. Is it sappy? Oh yeah. Is it a crowd pleaser? Without a doubt. And I'm pretty fucking pleased by it, since this is the ending this version of the story deserves. Anything less wouldn't have fit, and I don't feel like Dahl would have disagreed. He would have disagreed with this, though.
In a world of pure imagination.
But Braxton, didn't you know the depth version is a better— Listen, I just made a video about The Boys as a comic. I don't need to hear any more opinions people stole from a shitty YouTube video, okay? Also, don't write about how the one called Willy Wonka is more about Charlie and the one called Charlie is more about Wonka. I get you think you're being the most cleverest boy of the YouTube comment section, but you're not. You are an empty husk of a human being and everyone secretly hates you. Anyway, I know I'm a little inherently biased for this, seeing as I grew up with it and there's a lot of sentimental value involved, but on top of the fact I also grew up with the Burton version, I actually hadn't seen the thing in years leading up to me making this video, so I was totally open to the idea it wasn't that great, but nah, it's a fantastic adaptation. Sure, it's not the most accurate, at least in the sense it just copies the book word for word, which is what Dahl tried to do for the first draft of the screenplay, but honestly, out of all the Dahl books to just leave the way they are since they're perfect already, I don't think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is one of them. And I'm not trying to shit on it or anything, it's obviously iconic and has a bunch of great ideas. There's not even that much I'd personally complain about with it. I'm just saying it's not the type of story where if you change literally anything, it's instantly worse. And Wonka sort of proves that with how about 90% of its changes are just adding things to the story to give it depth, and the other 10% were used to make those new things even better. Just look at their version of Charlie. You know, in the book, he's a fine character. He gets the job done. You feel for him as this hopeful poor kid who never really gets any luxuries. He pulls at your heartstrings with his selflessness of never taking his grandparents' shares and hoping he could win a ticket despite shit getting so bad for him. There's even a great little character moment when, after finding some money, he finally lets himself be selfish for once instead of always thinking of others, and gets not just one, but 2 Wonka bars as a snack, which ends up winning him the tickets. There's just one problem, though. Once he gets to the factory, he doesn't do anything for the rest of the book. He pretty much just fucking sits there for the latter half of the story while all the other kids Darwin award themselves out of the running until, by virtue of him being the last one left, Wonka's like, "Congratulations, my dear boy. Through process of elimination, I have determined that you are indeed still here, so here's my factory." His character's kinda just stopped dead in its tracks for an underwhelming ending that doesn't feel earned. And like, I can appreciate how it's going for a sort of fable-y storytelling, where the idea is probably that since we spend the first half learning why Charlie deserves it, we can spend the second half showing why the other kids don't deserve it, hoo-hoo messaging. But you know what else I can appreciate? A main character who does things, and doesn't just shift into autopilot so the plot can carry him off to the finish line. "Well, Charlie, you haven't moved from the starting line since the race started, but I saw you train real hard for this, and it looks like all the other racers have been struck down by the force of God, so let's just call it your win, okay? It's gonna make for a great movie." You see how unsatisfying that is? It could stand to give him a little more, and the movie's very respectful about staying true to the character while doing that, since, hey, at the end of the day, he's still a selfless kid with a heart of gold. They don't lose the traits that make him Charlie, it's just now those traits are being used to tell a character arc, and it's pretty subtle, so if you're a fan of the book and don't notice, you're not losing anything, but it's definitely there, and it's something that goes back and forth a lot over the movie, that being Charlie's struggle to keep thinking like a kid. Since obviously the point of Wonka only taking kids is he wants someone with a kid's perspective to run the factory, and theoretically Charlie should be that kid since he's such a— well, look at him next to the other guys, but just to show even more why he deserves it, the film takes it a step further than the book by turning parts of the story into tests of whether he can stay true to his character. Like, in the book when he doesn't get a ticket the first few times, it's clear he's disappointed, but it doesn't seem to hurt him that much, since he knows it's kinda impossible. The second time, he's even able to laugh it off. But Charlie in the movies doesn't start out nearly so defeatist. Actually, he's really optimistic about it, like any kid would be. So as he keeps on losing, it's less of a sad acceptance and more of an absolute fucking fucking heartbreak. Like the world knows he's got less of a chance and wants him to suffer for even thinking it could happen. Almost as if the thing's testing him on whether he can hold on to that childish sense of optimism. And at points, he's clearly on the verge of giving in, especially when they hit you with the fake winner shit, which, by the way, not in the book at all. That's an original thing. But when he decides to buy a Wonka bar anyway, from judging by how he pauses and thinks, what looks like some deep-seated hope that's still somewhere inside him, Charlie finally getting the ticket is basically the film saying, alright, fine, you've earned this. I mean, there's a reason it's one of the most uplifting moments in movie history. It's pure hopium. Literally. The guy just never stopped hoping no matter what shit was flung at him, and that won him the ticket. It completely recontextualizes the meaning of the scene, and honestly, I sort of think it works better because there's way more emotional payoff. And the same thing goes for the shit with Slugworth, since while, yeah, we know why Charlie deserves the factory after the ticket stuff, Wonka really doesn't. So it's only kinda natural he'd throw in a looming temptation like Slugworth to see if these kids are worth it. And it's also gotta function thematically with how, while the first one tested his hopefulness, this one tests his morals. Since let's be real, for most people in this scenario, especially ones with spiteful adult mindsets like Grandpa Joe's, when given the chance to screw over Wonka after he tells them they lose, they get nothing, good day sir, they're probably gonna take it. So for Charlie to just straight up hand back the everlasting gobstopper, essentially trashing even the idea of double-crossing Wonka that's technically always been there as he held onto it, it's about the most selfless thing he could do. But how'd he know he'd give back the gobstopper? The same way I know you got that take from a certain video, I just do. For real though, I feel like that's a shitty nitpick. It's like asking, well, what if Luke didn't respond to Leia's message? What was he gonna do then? The point is his nature was gonna make him do it. There's never a reality where Charlie didn't give back the gobstopper, showing his character, so I don't see why we gotta get hung up on dumb hypotheticals. Do you ask a fish how it swims? Or a bird how it flies? No, you don't. They do it because they were born to do it. Quoted, the Candyman at the start of this fucking movie. It was bound to happen. And with Wonka's personality here, it definitely fits that even in this controlled setting, he'd still leave a bit of it up to chance to let fate decide, just like Charlie when he bought the winning bar. Oh, and speaking of Wonka, I know he's maybe the most hotly contested aspect adaptation-wise of them all, so I'm gonna just get it out there and say that I love this take on the character. Like, if there's anything my just because it's not one-to-one with the original doesn't mean it's a bad choice thing applies to, it's gotta be him, since he's not a straight replica of the original at all, and he's really not trying to be, which I think is why Dahl was so salty about his performance to begin with. It's not that he hated Gene Wilder as an actor, he just wanted an unchanged version for what he wrote from the book, and at least superficially, Wilder isn't going for that. You know, the Willy Wonka of the book, he's this big showman eccentric who loves talking about his inventions with this hyper-excited energy. He's almost like an autistic kid showing you all the sets he built from his Lego obsession, and Wilder isn't nearly that hyper, but that's just because he's going for a different take on the idea of Wonka, which is that he's a kid in a man's body. So instead of expressing that through being hyper and blunt, he does it through the fact that he's totally fucking with everyone the entire time. Of course, you're always gonna hear that one thing about how Wilder wanted to come out on a cane and do a flip just to show from the start that he's not a guy you can trust, but seriously, he's obviously still that candy-obsessed madman. He's just hiding it in this professional, suave demeanor to catch the parents off guard because he thinks it's funny. If the Wonka of the book started speaking in different languages or doing bits like the tunnel scene, you just chalk it up to him being a weirdo. But with that calm-looking guy as a mask, it makes it both way more shocking and way more unexpected, which is exactly what he's going for since he's kind of a mischievous little shit. He likes messing around with the people he thinks will deserve it, and I like how that gives him an edge the book version didn't have. It makes him feel more like an actual kid at heart instead of just on the spectrum. Though if you pay attention, there is still that autistic obsession there. He's just hiding it. One of the little moments I always go back to is when Augustus falls in the river, since it's the only time you can tell Wonka's actually angry and breaking character to whine about how it could ruin his chocolate before slipping back in. And then there's just the fun petty stuff, like him swatting his cane at everyone to keep them in place for his choreography. God, I wish I could have picked up the subtleties of Wilder's performance as a kid. It had so much to the movie, but yeah, to me, this is the definition of great adaptation, since it's taking a character we already know, keeping the core of what they are intact, but changing them into something new for a completely different experience that brings out other themes of the story. For some people, adaptation just means translating the thing without adding your own voice to the pot, but I think stuff like this that embraces change while respecting the original is just as, if not even better, especially if the overall ideas and story are kept intact, since it's actually adapting the work, which is probably why I also just loved
That's the life for me, yeah!
Not too many talk about this that often unless it's so they can lust over Miss Spider, which, no comment. But if I could just be straight with you guys real quick, This was always going to be something I gushed about, good adaptation or not, because it's unironically one of my favorite movies. And I can admit part of that might come down to nostalgia, but then again, I didn't really start appreciating this thing on the level I do until about a year ago. Before then, it was sort of just this weird movie I needed a lot of patience to get through since the DVD was scratched to shit for me playing it so much. And I fully acknowledge that it's got some problems. The kid who plays James is pretty here and there acting-wise with some shit deliveries, and that only gets more noticeable once it's just his voice doing the talking when the thing goes animated. Plus, it's just a bit slow starting up with a couple moments that kind of drag, but all that seems to fall apart for me when I remember this is the most charming thing I've ever seen in my life. The characters all have so much personality, I never get tired of watching them, their chemistry is just phenomenal. The imagination that went into the villains makes them so fucking unique and memorable. Like, sometimes I'll just be sitting playing Subnautica and think about the mecha shark that shoots fish heads or that random Jack Skellington cameo. The music is enchanting. I know some people have a thing against Randy Newman, but I've always loved the deceptive simplicity of his songs, and this is probably my favorite work from him, and god fucking damn, the animation gives me orgasms. This shit is still unbelievable to me even today. I've never seen a stop-motion movie that looked any better than this, and considering it came out in the mid-90s, that's a huge accomplishment. I mean, I don't want to get too animation nerd technical here or anything, but the leaps this made for the medium after the literal same guy made Nightmare Before Christmas a couple years earlier, basically unheard of. It's like if we went from cells to digital to CGI in 4 years. That's how big a difference this is. Just the integration of computer elements, the camera angles, the lighting, the scale. Damn, I wish Henry Selick did more movies. The guy deserved way more than the 5 films he got over the last 30 years. So what if he made Monkey Bone? Monkey Bone was at least interesting. Most people don't have the creative juice to make Brendan Fraser flirt with an orangutan. You shouldn't take that kind of genius for granted. Also, fuck Disney for canceling Shadow King. I know where you live, Bob Iger, and I'm gonna be sending several passive-aggressive letters voicing my distaste for your creative choices. Actually though, even with all the technical stuff Selick kept improving on with his other work, I still feel like James was his peak direction-wise. Like, again, I don't want to harp on the animation too much, but the absolute weight of the characters when they move, the little mannerisms they have that make them feel different, just the entire sequence of us seeing the peach roll down a hill from the perspective of the cast and sight it. I can never run out of things to appreciate about this movie, so when I started getting ready for this video, I was a little scared I might find something to hate in it as an adaptation, but look, man, you already know where I put it, so clearly it wasn't that bad. Either that or I'm just the best at gaslighting myself, which could be just as possible, but no, this is a great adaptation. It's just unconventional, like my relationship with your mother. Sure, it could take some getting used to, but once you give it a chance, I think you'll notice all the good it does without replacing the original. So come on, sport, you can call me daddy. Your mom already does. No, but it does a really good job at using the skeleton of the book to tell a story with a completely different meaning. And I think what made that transition so smooth is that unlike most of Dahl's stories, where it's a little hard to change the meaning up if you're not taking a bunch of creative liberties, James isn't nearly as hard to reinterpret with new ideas. You know, conceptually, the main idea is trying to capture the immigrant experience in World War II, with James as this kid who loses his parents and crosses the sea to reach the land of opportunity, but when you get down to it, if you take those ideas away, it's a story about a kid with some shitty relatives who escapes in a giant magical peach and goes on adventures with big talking bugs. So its themes aren't exactly integral to the story if you don't want them to be. It's kind of like Godzilla. He might have initially been written as a scathing critique on the everlasting impact of nuclear testing and the looming threat it holds over nature, but when you get down to it, the kids who are watching only saw a giant monster destroying that really Japanese-looking building, so theoretically the sky's the limit. He can be a villain, a force of nature fighting pollution, a representation of strength a kid can use to outwit some Home Alone bandits. All it takes is the right framing. And Selick seemed to have a pretty good idea of what he wanted to do for his version, which admittedly sort of turns the thing into a surrealist nightmare sometimes, but in all the best ways, since it's playing a lot more into the darker side of James that the book kinda shoves aside after the opening. Granted, the opening is darker than usual. Our literal introduction to James is learning his parents were killed by a rhino that got set loose from the zoo, and he's currently staying with his abusive aunts who just love beating the shit out of him, apparently. Oh, and did I mention that one of them is fat? Cause, oh boy, this book loves talking about how fat Aunt Sponge is. But don't you worry, she doesn't stay fat for long, because the peach quite literally crushes her and Aunt Spiker before anything else in the story. And that's basically the end of the dark stuff in the book, almost like it got squeezed out along with Sponge and Spiker's guts and the cold hard earth that presumably envelops them over the rest of the story, which is charming on its own, the story, not the decomposition, but I was sort of craving more of that darkness Dahl usually spreads out over his books.
I don't know if it had anything to do with this being one of his first goes or whatever, but the film feels more in line with his later stuff to me in the way it balances wholesome charm and the most fucked up shit imaginable, and it really seems to get what that balance is founded on that I mentioned before, taking fantasy and throwing some reality on top. So now instead of his aunts just getting squeezed to death and leaving it there, they're pretty much haunting the narrative from the second James gets away, which makes sense given the whole Rhino story goes from a fact of life James has to accept to this sadistic taunt they use to keep him in line. It's sufficiently fucked up, taunting a kid with the death of his parents. Surprised Dahl didn't think of that himself. But what really takes it over the edge is how they blend it with the story through not just the ants showing up, but also a physical manifestation of his fears that wasn't done with any computer effects. They just did it practically so it looks amazing. But yeah, that's mainly the trend of this film, taking elements from the book and making them representations of his fears. So some sharks that attacked him are shaped like the oven that spits out his dinner of fish heads, his ants turn into this hovering phantom reminding him of his fears, and the pirates don't really represent anything, but pirates are cool, so who gives a fuck? Even the journey itself turns into being about James standing up to his fears and looking at them from a different angle, which could explain how the bugs who were his only friends turned into the found family he has for the movie. And I know I said this already, but seriously, they're a perfect crew. There's a couple small changes from the book, like getting rid of the silkworm and moving Earthworm's beef with Centipede over to Grasshopper, but like with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I think I prefer it, since it helps a lot to even out their screen time and make them all feel important. Not to diss on Silkworm too much or anything, but she is kind of a bum who only helps with the same weaving trick as Spider, so she was extremely dispensable, and I completely love Earthworm without his pessimism. He's way more likable as just a total paranoid neurotic. And it also gives way for the beef between Centipede and Grasshopper, which is one of the best enemies to lover stories in fiction. And they even keep in line with the theme of immigrants by making them different nationalities, meaning there's actually a reason Spider became a gloomy French dami-mommy. Take that, my basic understanding of shame. But sometimes mostly thematic changes with a couple cast and story ones just aren't quite enough. Case in point.
So, Esio Trot, the original story, is a little bit creepy. Like, with Dahl, there's always going to be a few moments that might raise a modern eyebrow a smidge, and I don't think those moments should be removed, but Esio Trot, probably the only one that's at least mildly concerning on a conceptual level. It's Dahl's last story he ever wrote before his death in the 90s, and you can tell it's trying to be fairly innocent. There's this old guy, Mr. Hoppy. He's got a crush on a woman a floor down from him who wants her tortoise to grow, so he just buys up all the tortoises in town and switches them out really slowly while making her think it's growing. And by that description, I'm guessing you think, well, that sounds wholesome. I don't see what's so wrong with that. The exact phrasing she uses is that she'll become the slave of whoever can do it, and Mr. Hoppy seems just a little too enthusiastic to take her up on that offer. Now, I'm not accusing Mr. Hoppy of any malicious intentions here, but considering he's forming his whole marriage based on a lie, I'm just saying I wouldn't put it past him if there was more he wasn't telling us. And you know, when I read this story, I was thinking to myself, how are they going to turn this into a movie? It already feels a bit long at 62 pages. I don't see how they can stretch it to 90 minutes. And, well, it turns out the answer was James Corden. Okay, I'm fucking around since it's just such a baffling casting choice that also makes way too much sense knowing when it was made, but James Corden doesn't actually play that big a role in the thing, thank fucking God. He's mostly just there for narrator status while the real story's going on, so if you don't try to watch it too closely, you might even forget he's the guy behind it for a while. But don't you worry, from time to time they like to cut back to him doing some random shit while narrating, so he'll be sure to jump scare you when you least expect it. If you take him out of the equation, though, I gotta say, this is about the best reinterpretation of a weird collar tug story since maybe Starship Troopers, and I don't say that lightly. Not that Esio Trot is anywhere near as good as that movie, but given the source it was working with, this is probably the best outcome in that it's just cute and harmless and a little bit sweet more than it is genuinely worrying. They don't take too many swings with the premise, it's fundamentally more or less the same, they just change it enough so that Mr. Hoppy isn't a total lying pervert and Miss Silver isn't a total oblivious dumbass. So now one just wants to prove he's worthy of loving Silver but doesn't know how, and the other's trying to get Hoppy's attention but he doesn't notice because he's an introvert. Oh, and they also have this third guy in the mix, Mr. Pringle, who's pretty straight up about wanting to dust Silver's curtains. I hate myself for writing that, but he's kind of just there to push them together, so really all you need to know is that he does in fact eat tortoise shit thinking its food, and I thought that was a beautiful reference to pink flamingos. But honestly, the main thing that decides whether or not this works for you is the leads. And on top of them being played by Dustin Hoffman and Judi Dench, the king and queen of fuck it, my legacy cemented, I can do whatever I want, they're also just charming and fun to watch based on the writing. Hoppy's more of an inventor now since he has to build a contraption to replace the turtles. Silver's more of an extrovert to offset Hoppy's shyness. They got a bit more into how much Hoppy's giving to do this by dipping into his savings, making it seem way less like a purely selfish thing. It's nice. I wouldn't call it anything deep. It's still just a TV movie at the end of the day, but hey, that's enough for me to say good job, guys. They don't suck as much. Plus, they do the most obvious change and make it so Silver actually does find out and turns it into a moment instead of her just blissfully never knowing she was essentially scammed. So yeah, overall, nice changes. Updates where it needs to update, just old Yeller James Corden behind the turtle shed and we'll call it a day. But there's one more of these I think deserves the label of good, and it definitely goes the furthest at stretching the term adaptation here, but that doesn't stop it being one of the best of these movies, period. You know the one I'm talking about. Now, if there's any Dahl story I'd assume wouldn't work as a feature-length movie, it'd be Esio Trot, but Fantastic Mr. Fox isn't far behind, since while it's not nearly as uncomfortable as that, it's not very complex either. The thing's a bit longer than Esio at around 100 pages, but even still, the story's basically just Mr. Fox is a sneaky guy who avoids the farmer's traps, the farmers come to his hole and gun for his family, Fox digs to their stash while they stay at the hole, damn honey, you sure are fantastic, 50 pages dedicated to nasty graphic Fox sex. It's your standard children's book, probably the least Dahl thing Dahl ever wrote. I mean, it's still got his style and all, but come on, the most fucked up thing that happens is Mr. Fox getting his tail shot off. There's not even a hint of implied murder or child slave labor. Way to sell out, Dahl. God, I don't think I could ever be more offended by Dahl than I am at this very moment. Anyway, Fantastic Mr. Fox, not something I have the most attachment to, which I'll admit could be part of why it was easy for me to love the film despite it being super different, but listen, as far as total reworkings of a short story that massively alters the foundation of it go, this is about as respectful as you can get, and actually, I've been using that word respectful a lot lately, so with this film for reference, let me tell you what I mean when I say that. An adaptation that's respectful of its source is one where there's no explicit contradictions of the text, the general vibe or spirit's kept intact, and the artists do enough to show their fans the work even if they're changing it. All the ones I'm going to talk about in the mix section are going to fail at least one of these. All the ones in the bad, at least two. Which is why I just couldn't bring myself to put this anywhere lower than good, since it might straddle the line on these a bit, but there's no way Wes Anderson wasn't trying everything in his power to show he loved Dahl and the book, because he puts way more effort into it than most of these. I mean, you can't go much further than literally starting on a cover of the book, now a major motion picture label and everything. And you could say, oh, that's just Wes Anderson's style, which, yeah, that's what makes him the perfect choice for this. The guy loves making his shit look like a set or theater thing, so when you mix that kind of flat composition with stop-motion movements, it feels like you're watching the art of a book come to life, and he takes full advantage of that to do some really interesting stuff visually. Like, naturally, there's this whole perfect symmetry bit, which works especially well in a medium where you control literally every aspect of it, but he seems to know there's way more options for what he can do with this, so he experiments in ways you know he never could have in live action. Stuff like letting the animal characters move faster with less frames to show their speed, or only showing us glimpses of a fight in flashing still frames. It's a very graphic movie, design-wise I mean, though well, when the cast are eating it's pretty graphic in the other sense too. That's some nice carnage. For real though, this knows exactly when to evoke the books in a fun way that reminds you where it's coming from without being performative, which it easily could have been, seeing as, like I said, this is the loosest adaptation of the of this section, to the point that technically speaking the story of the book only sorta takes up about half of the movie, with the rest of it being original, but it never feels like it thinks it's too good for the book and needs to do more purely for the sake of it, like some movies I know. Since even if it's going in a new direction creatively, you can't deny that Fox still tricks the farmers, he still pulls one over on them, and there's still 50 pages of violent Fox sex. Everything you need to know to get it's a Fantastic Mr. Fox movie is still there, it's just been repackaged with new visions on the characters, style, and overall themes. In a way, it's like how the Odyssey is to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The pieces are there, you just never imagined them being arranged this way. Though obviously Fox isn't nearly as loose as that. It's more just going for a modern update in a very straightforward way, and by that I mean they just constantly mention how things are changing and forcing them out of their old habits. Actually, at some points it almost feels like a sequel to the book, which might have been the intention, seeing as a big theme of the story is that Fox can't stay bound to a more modern way of living, since deep down he knows he's a wild animal and has to accept that instead of hiding it away to pretend it isn't there. Like in
in the same way this is about as blatant as you can get homaging the source material, it's about as open as you can get about being an updated version of the story, and that ends up making the changes feel way more natural than they would have been otherwise. Giving Mrs. Fox a bigger role, turning the other animals into regular guys, smashing all his kids into one who's just a little goth ball of pessimism, even adding a very Wes Anderson-style character in Christopherson, who, if the theme about modernism wasn't so big, would definitely feel wrong here, given he's a soft-spoken, sensitive, acrobatic karate master, but in the context of what they're doing here, he fits right in. It's a weird phenomenon for sure, but with just how ingrained the idea of society forcing you to change is in the story, it makes the differences come off way less arbitrary than if it weren't. It's an extremely clever way of making the transition work, and it's through that framing that Anderson's style doesn't feel out of place here, since, let's get one thing straight, Anderson and Dahl have very different styles of writing. Dahl's work is usually wacky and out there. He likes using playful descriptions and cynical jokes to give this fun atmosphere that's suitable for kids but doesn't talk down to them. But Anderson isn't out there at all. He actually likes to subdue the wackiness of absurd shit to make fun of the contrast or focus on the subtleties that bring out the humanity of it. He's someone who chooses to have loads of his cast speak in monotone just because it makes the stuff they say that much funnier. It's almost the opposite of Dahl, and weirdly that's why it works here, since the tone matches with how the animals have been forced to suppress themselves to act normal. He's basically turned the contrast into the appeal of the story, so it's not working against what Dahl did, it's building onto it in a way that makes sense, meaning that through it being the opposite of Dahl's style, it's simultaneously more respectful to it than almost any other adaptation in this video. Try wrapping your head around that one. But Anderson doesn't always fit just right with Dahl, and I can show how now that I'm finally getting to...
Yeah, I was being so positive there, I couldn't fucking stand it. Time to dig into some good old-fashioned internet reviewer vitriol, or... Well, I would say that, but I'm on the mixed section right now, so it's not going to be straight venom just yet, but that doesn't mean I don't have some decently sized complaints. It just so happens I also have some non-complaints, or compliments, as the normies like to call them, since there's still a ton to like here, same as any Anderson movie. Look, what do you want from me? The guy's just too methodical and layered for me not to be at least a little impressed. I'm sorry I'm such a dirty letterboxd reviewer. Follow me there, by the way, just stop YT. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some cool shit in this. The fact that it's all shot to look like one take on a real theater stage, the way it transitions to new sets by either walking across to them or straight up taking them apart and rebuilding them in real time, and there's just this cool dissonance between it and Mr. Fox of how Anderson tries to make it as accurate as possible by literally having characters recite the book verbatim for most of it, including action descriptions, when a version of Roald Dahl himself isn't narrating. Like, even if I didn't like the thing, which I do, I couldn't help but appreciate all the small stuff this does to experiment and not just be Mr. Fox again. It gets points for seriously trying, but if I'm gonna be honest about what I like, I've also gotta be honest about what I don't. And I know it's gonna sound kinda off at first, but one of the biggest problems is just how faithful it is. Since, like I was talking about before, Anderson's style doesn't naturally mesh with Dahl's, since they're total opposites, and he seemed to be aware of that when he was doing Mr. Fox, given that difference in modernization was the whole point, so it fit, but here he's trying to do it as straight as humanly possible, so the difference doesn't highlight what's new as much as it highlights what's not there anymore. The emotional highs of the original story, and the large parts of that story that are completely missing, something that's very hard to miss when you've read the story before while the film's being this meticulous. And unlike Mr. Fox, there's not some in-story reason for removing the details. It doesn't address leaving stuff out for some deeper thematic purpose. It's just telling the story in a hyper-condensed way that, I guess, had to get rid of enough so it could stay a short film, since what they do have here already feels like it's playing at 1.5 speed. They make it work fine enough for the style of the movie, but it's not something you're gonna ignore, and if you've read the story before, you're especially not gonna ignore what they cut, since those bits were essential context for certain themes. I mean, you get all the basic stuff. Henry's a lazy rich asshole. He finds a book about a guy from India who used yoga techniques to see without his eyes. He spends years training it to see through cards and beat the system even though he's already rich. He realizes it makes his wins hollow. He decides to use it for good. If you're telling the story from SparkNote summaries, it gets everything down, but there's so many little nuances you'd think Anderson would want to focus on that just don't end up making it into his draft. Like how there's supposed to be this really intentional dichotomy between Henry Henry and the Indian guy he's reading about, Imrat Khan, whose backstory is all about coming from nothing and constantly seeking the truth that Henry just happens to come by when he's already got everything except the knowledge that book will give him. And by that same token, you're supposed to notice how while Khan ends up using it for the purely selfish reason of being famous, which leads to his downfall, Henry sees almost instantly not just how hollow it all is, but how disgusting the people he spent his time with are now that he's got a new perspective from spending years honing his craft to see things differently. Like, I don't know why they thought it'd be enough to say he just thought the men looked greedy, but it's not. Without the explanation or the detail, it doesn't have that same impact. Just like when a scene later he throws the money out the window and gets chewed out by a police officer who tells him he should give the money to people who need it instead of just whoever picks it up, but for some reason it doesn't mention how he personally relates since he grew up in an orphanage and didn't have much himself. Sure, it's a small difference, but it makes a world of difference how you think of the policeman's words, and this is Wes Anderson. The guy's literally known for his detail, so it's pretty strange to me how he'd leave out these pieces purely for time that, without them, add up to make the overall story way more emotionally detached and hollow. There's not the same sympathy for everything Imrat gave up to get the power, that catharsis at Henry waking up to the world around him, that anger from someone who personally understands why Henry throwing money out a window is bullshit. It gives off this vibe like he's way more focused on doing goofy experiments with his style than keeping the substance, and there's that same type of feeling for the other stories he adapts, especially The Swan. Yeah, it's cool he has it so one guy's doing all the character voices like an audiobook, but it takes one of the most heart-wrenching, intense little stories Dahl's ever written and strips it of any emotion. Again, I like all the fun shit he does with these, and they're worth watching if just for the novelty, but knowing how, sick his last take on Dahl was, this left me way less satisfied. And that's gonna be the trend of these mixed ones. They aren't low quality exactly, but man, I can't stop thinking about how much they could have improved with just a few small changes. Wait, a few? Small? Changes? None of these words have any relation to the— Alright, trust me, this one hurts to put in mix, since I was really excited when I heard it was happening. A film adaptation of the musical adaptation of the book that was the basis for a movie I loved as a kid? Fuck yeah, I love Brand. Okay, the jump wasn't that big. I was actually a fan of the musical before I even knew it was gonna be a movie, and it was for totally different reasons from the 90s film, since it was extremely good at making an identity for itself. It was fast, it was funny, it had that dry edge you could only get from those fucking teabaggers across the pond. It didn't come off like a retread at all, and honestly, it was cool to see an adaptation of this story from the country that actually made it. So when I heard it was getting a film, I was pretty excited, since all the other musicals I was into at the time, like Heathers, Dear Evan Hansen, and Hamilton, didn't have anything on the horizon at the time. I was 13 when I heard about it, okay? It was 2017. Don't even bother trying to take shots at me. You could never hate me more than I hated myself back then. I was interested to see what type of direction they'd take with it. And I also had a lot of expectations since the musical set a bunch of standards for itself that the 90s one never did. Like, was a man still going to be playing the trunchbull in this? Did they have to change the story at all to account for the runtime? Were they going to keep all the songs or inevitably take out a few that are mostly fine but remove one that's super plot relevant like most musical to movie adaptations do? And then there's the obvious question about how much it's going to focus on being an adaptation of the book versus being an adaptation of the musical, since that's two levels of adaptation it's got to keep up with, and frankly, I don't trust most musicals with one, so that's leaving an uncomfortably large margin for them to fuck it up with. And to summarize how I think they did, it's okay. Could have been better, could have been worse. The people involved seem to be trying their best. I wouldn't say any of it was phoned in. I just think it's sloppy. And hey, part of that comes down to restrictions. Like, if you know anything about stage-to-movie musical adaptations, you should know one of the first obstacles is making sure it's not just a best-of compilation instead of a full experience. And that's a hard thing to balance, knowing just how much they've got to cut or summarize to make it work. I mean, it's a miracle we get good movie musicals, period, without them all taking the Wicked approach of one act a movie. And for the most part here, I think they did a decent job without making it too distracting. You know, like I said, I'm a big fan of the musical, but I can also say some of it's sort of fillery. That song from the dad about watching TV, the entirety of the brother character, pretty much anything about the mom being an amateur salsa dancer, I don't love that they're missing now, but realistically, I can get over it. The only song stuff that really gets to me is I miss the parts of the opening Miracle they cut, mostly because the school song is supposed to start with a reprise of it, but can't, so now it just starts. And they cut almost all the songs about Miss Honey, which makes her feel like a way smaller character than she honestly should be. Loud I could understand since that's only partially about her, and Pathetic at least doesn't go on for that long, but
this little girl? I get it's carrying on from Pathetic and they cut the initial context she's supposed to be singing it in, but still, that's the main thing that shows her resolve for Matilda in the face of her own fear. It's a super character-defining song for her, and it's only 2 minutes, so what was the point of getting rid of it? If it weren't for them keeping My House, she'd probably feel less important than Mrs. Phelps the librarian, who's been given a weirdly bigger role here as Matilda's friend that only takes away from the relationship building she should have with Miss Honey. I guess they wanted to add a character who could tell Matilda, i.e. the audience, hey kids, if you're going through it, you should try talking to an adult who will listen, which is a pretty far cry from the realism of sometimes adults aren't reliable and don't believe you and you don't really have anyone else to rely on except yourself, but oh well, kids don't need to know about the hard truths of life they might have to deal with anyway. This message brought to you by Agatha Trunchbull. Really though, disregarding the songs, the biggest problems I have with it pacing-wise are just the same ones I have with the show in general, which is they rush through the opening way too fast to get to the school stuff, all of Matilda's friendships with the other kids are non-existent, and there's not enough time given to developing her powers. I can get why it wasn't changed since they were already on a time crunch so they had to think about cutting shit, but those are still big parts of the story that make it suffer without them. Like, there's around a 6-minute difference between the 90s film and this one for when Matilda gets to school, and if you watch them back to back like I did, you definitely feel it. Since in the 90s film, you really feel like you know Matilda's living situation and how she grew up to be as simultaneously independent and isolated from her family as she gets. Whereas in the musical, it sort of just takes you from when she was born to right before she enters school, and I can see why the stage version would want to skip that. It's not easy showing someone growing from a baby to a full-grown kid in a theater setting while also demonstrating how smart they are, especially if they were using real, age-accurate kids who are unpredictable little monsters, but a movie's way more controlled than that, so they could have taken the chance to make it accurate. But since they don't, both the parents and Matilda aren't nearly as developed as they should be by the time she gets to school. We don't know enough about her family life, her talent, how much she wanted to go to school, which is supposed to make the expectation versus reality hit harder. All we know early on is she's smart and her parents are assholes, so she gets back at them. It's way too basic. And then when she gets to school, she becomes like this Spartacus figure inspiring other kids, but we never actually see them becoming friends with her aside from Lavender going, "Are we friends? Yeah? Okay, cool." Which sucks because I liked seeing the small ways Matilda empowered her friend group. It felt way more realistic than her just suddenly getting the whole school on her side. Just like she suddenly has powers and sees them get exponentially stronger without even needing to do shit to train it. And I'm not talking about moving stuff around or the little tricks she does in the movie. No, I mean the literal second thing she does after lifting a cup is cause the Chokey to fucking explode. Then during the climax, she turns Chains into a ghost to Miss Honey's dad who puts the Trunchbull into pigtails before flinging her out of the school, which, okay, the 90s movie took it further than the book, but that at least showed her training to harness it. This just feels out of nowhere. It's not built up at all that she can do something this crazy. They're just doing it because it makes for a bigger finale, even though the smaller climax in the 90s movie felt way more satisfying since it made the win a team effort where everyone the Trunchbull bullied got a chance to swing at her. It's still a cool scene and all, but I can't help thinking it could have been better. Doesn't help that I'm not as hot on the Trunchbull here either, which maybe isn't too surprising given it's hard to top a performance like Pam Ferris's that'll go down in legend for how iconic it is, but it's not the performance that's the issue here at all. Honestly, if we're just going off book to movie rules, this is a way more accurate version of the Trunchbull than the 90s film, and Emma Thompson plays it exactly how the book Trunchbull should act. The only issue is that this isn't the book. It's the musical. And the musical version of Trunchbull is very different from the book version. I already mentioned how on stage she's always played by a man in drag, and that should be a pretty big tell for how she is, i.e. she's way more exaggerated to up the comedy. And for the record, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different interpretation of something she definitely is. The 90s movie played up her viciousness, the musical plays up her absurdity as a grown woman lording over children, and that's where the movie feels off going for a book-accurate performance, since Thompson's just way too subdued for what her character should be doing and saying. I mean, just listen to the difference in delivery here.
He should have thought of that before he made a pact with Satan and decided to steal my cake.
He should have thought of that before he made a pact with Satan and decided to steal my cake.
See, she's taken the bit way too seriously, so the jokes don't hit anywhere close to as well as they're supposed to. Though then again, I can't really blame her, seeing as that tonal inconsistency sorta littered across the film, where sometimes it's leaning too hard into the book when it should be going big like the musical, or conversely, it's exaggerating in places it shouldn't, like the Trunchbull making a billion chokies for the kids, which kinda takes away the initial realness it had, and I could go into that more if I wanted, but Look, man, I've been complaining about this for a while, and if I do it anymore, I feel like people are gonna get the impression I hate this when I legitimately don't. There's a reason I put it in the mix section and not the bad. There's plenty of things to like here. The effects are great for the budget. It keeps most of the story intact without feeling abridged. Most of the actors, especially Miss Honeys, are giving a strong performance. And damn, the amount of choreography these kids can pull off in such a big group is so impressive. I don't think I've ever seen anything this big in scale with kid dancers aside from Annie. And even then, it's given that a run for its money. I could have hated this entire movie, and I still would have thought it was worth it just for the revolting children's sequence. And that's kind of the thing with this. It doesn't get the whole of it right, but when a scene works, it works. My house, the scent of rebellion, everything around Matilda's story, isolated, those are perfect adaptations of the musical. Would I say it's worth getting through the rest of this? That's up to you. Personally, I go back and forth on it. I don't think it's the best first exposure if you haven't already listened through the soundtrack or seen it live, but if you have, I'd say give it a go. Remember, I still like all the movies in this section. There's just a lot of flaws that hold it back for me. And yes, that includes...
Wow, Braxton. Wow. I can't believe you haven't gotten your opinion from the same video I adopted as my opinion after doing zero research to verify it. How am I supposed to trust you?
It's 3 a.m. What are you doing in my house? Right, so I understand what the general word about this is as an adaptation, and I want to start by making it clear that I can see where that praise comes from. The story is almost identical. The visuals are amazing. The songs are creative and go as far as repurposing lyrics straight from the book. The kids are all updated and expanded into newer versions of their respective stereotypes. By most metrics, this should be a great adaptation, but there's one thing holding it back. Okay, two things. I never liked how because it's so accurate to the book, Charlie doesn't have to do shit to win the factory, but I think we should all know what the main thing holding it back is. Willy Wonka. Oh my god, this creative choice was fucking terrible. And I don't want to hear anything about, it's more accurate to the book than the Wilder version, because listen to my words when I say them, you regurgitative sheep of a person. No, it's fucking not. Now, that's not to say it doesn't understand the idea of Wonka, because it does. It couldn't have possibly been this bad if they didn't know what they were doing. It's just that, like the Wilder version, it's a reinterpretation. But unlike the Wilder version, this one sucks. Like, I get the idea they were going for. Wonka's a kid in a man's body, so Burton wanted to lean into the more demented side of that by making him this awkward dork with unresolved issues. That I can understand. It even sounds like a workable idea with the right framing, but this just straight up isn't that. I mean, for the sake of argument, let's say this actually was an accurate portrayal. Let's pretend Wonka wasn't a bubbly eccentric with a load of energy, and instead imagine that originally he was this ball of awkward annoyingness over here. How does that change the fact he's the worst part of the movie? Because I always hear this smug rambling about, oh, it's more accurate to the book, but even if that actually was true, which it isn't, who cares if it's still a downgrade? If being more accurate to something means being worse, why would you do it? I mean, you look at the difference between the screen presence of Depp and Wilder, it's night and day. Wilder's performance is funny and charming and subtle and weird. He's able to bounce off any and everyone while showing there's way more to him than meets the eye. He adds something to the original story and presentation that the book just didn't have. Meanwhile, Depp here is stiff, repetitive. It never feels like he knows exactly what he's going for. I won't say it all misses. Sometimes he has a fun line or moment that hits the right note, but 99 times out of 100, whenever he gets the focus, he just sucks out all the energy from the scene. Like, I could feel the whimsy leaving my body the moment they cut to him. And what's worse, comedically, no one seems to know how to match his freak. So every time it's like he's playing to the crowd instead of to the other characters. He just doesn't fit. And neither does the added subplot around his dentist daddy issues. Again, cool concept in theory. Wonka's obsession with candy draws a rift between him and his strict father? Interesting. That joke about him going to the Flag Museum and coming back to see his whole house gone? Great bits. But fuck me, it never feels like it's naturally integrated. It's shoved in at random moments every single time. And the way it all culminates when, as the film should be over, it just keeps going for another 15 minutes to resolve it? Christ. And look, I'm aware Burton was taking from his own experience to try and add a personal touch. That much I can respect, but it's still a forced, stupid, last-minute character arc that doesn't feel earned or connected to the rest of the story at all. So, sorry to say, it only makes me hate the Depp version of this character even more. And I know what you're thinking. Braxton, why is it this isn't mixed when you've only got one big problem with it? Shouldn't all the great or good elements cancel it out? And I thought of that. I seriously have. There have even been moments where I almost thought about putting it in good since I still like the movie overall. But anytime I hear, slap me some skin, soul brother, or that fucking laugh he does every once in a while, I just know I can't overlook it. It's one element to the movie, but it's such a big element that's so hard to miss, I just can't find it in me to put it up higher. Nothing personnel, kid. I still think you're strong enough to watch every once in a while. Just be glad you're not down there with the
Huh. You know, I was making a thing about knowing there's gonna be people who are mad at me for my Charlie take, but actually this one's probably way more controversial, since I know a lot of people who love The Witches, and honestly, I totally understand. This thing was almost sort of designed to be a cult movie. Fucked up concepts to keep you awake at night, ungodly makeup effects that don't belong anywhere near a kid's movie, some killer character actors giving great performances. It's the type of weirdly memorable bomb you always hear about on the playground from kids who had a VHS of it at home. Kinda like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, or, well, James and the Giant Peach. You're almost guaranteed to know its reputation if you haven't actually watched it, but I think if there was ever an argument for why all those things don't automatically add up to a good movie, it would be this. Cause I wanted to like it, I really did. I mean, some of my top movies are Death Becomes Her, Darkman, What We Do in the Shadows. Zany dark comedies with macabre undertones are my favorite genre of film, so I came in expecting to just eat this thing up, but I really didn't. And it's not cause those elements underdelivered, they are exactly as big as I thought they'd be, so I got some decent mileage from them alone, but that's just it. This doesn't have anything else to offer. It's kind of a hollow experience, and yeah, in case you were wondering, that's a big part of where it fails as an adaptation, since the book The Witches is not only by far Dahl's darkest story, but it's also one of his most conceptually and thematically interesting. Not to mention it's just the one where he goes the hardest saying, fuck them kids, the world could use some more schizophrenics, since literally the first thing this book does is go into extensive detail on how witches blend in with regular adults and could be basically anyone, including someone you know. He was trying to make conspiracy theorists from page one, and I gotta say, it does some pretty heavy lifting to make almost every scene at least a little intense and unnerving. You never feel like the main kid or his grandmother are safe, especially when it mentions all the sadistic things they do to kids so they never get caught. It's like you're just waiting to see what'll happen when one does get its hands on the main kid, and to say the least, it doesn't disappoint. I mean, at first it doesn't seem too bad, just turning him into a mouse, or more specifically a human in the shape of a mouse, it's a whole thing, but it really starts to sink in how horrible it is around the time you find out there's no way to turn him back. He's just permanently stuck that way for the rest of his life, which, by the way, is explicitly mentioned to have been shortened down to maybe 9 years at most. So after a certain point, we're kind of just left with the fact our main character, this kid, isn't gonna turn back to a human and isn't gonna get to live a full life. And the weird thing about that is, it's able to spin that into this somber but unexpectedly optimistic, kind of beautiful, warm message about accepting your circumstances and enjoying the life you still have. Which you don't tend to see with these, fucking obviously, but there's something so uplifting about how this kid doesn't get discouraged by what's happened to him and chooses to take it in stride. I could see it meaning a lot to kids with disabilities or chronic illnesses reading the story about being able to live a good life as long as you have someone who can love you through it no matter what. Which makes his line about being glad he'll never live in a world without his grandma so simultaneously dark and poetic. Because to one side it's like, damn, that's pretty fucking morbid for a kid's book, but to the other, there's a very universal relatability in that, of being in a world where you never have to lose someone you couldn't imagine living without. And if there was a world where you were a mouse with only so many years to live, there's gotta be worse ways to go out than traveling the world with your grandma taking out witches before they can kill loads of kids. I think that might even be why this is the only Dahl book where he never names the main kid, so you can more easily put yourself in his shoes and imagine what it's like from his perspective. I don't know, maybe Dahl just felt like it. I'm sort of questioning whether or not everything here has a deeper meaning with just how much harder it goes than most of his work. And that's not a slight against Dahl's other books, since they usually have some worthwhile themes. It's just that this one makes it feel like going from Spiderwick Chronicles to Bridge to Terabithia. Sometimes I like it when only certain people get my references. And here's another one. Going from the book to the movie feels like going from Bridge to Terabithia to The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, in the sense that it still has some of the hints of a deeper story that challenges the reader, but it's not willing to actually go that extra mile for fear of, well, I want to say controversy, but the real ones know it's for fear of making the audience conflicted or confused or basically any other complex emotion that comes with nuance. It's almost like they systematically took everything that made the book creepy or unique and got rid of it. That opening bit about witches blending in and possibly being anyone that sets the tone for the rest of the story, gone. The movie's only barely an hour and a half, so they don't have time to build up atmosphere. Here, take some rushed exposition instead, you little bitch. That foreboding dread about waiting to see what a witch will do to the kid, it's kinda still there, since they mention the girl who shows up in a painting and grows older until she disappears, but they don't mention anything about the kids turned into animals who lived out their whole lives that way, so I'd argue there's some important context missing. And that thing about the kid not turning back and accepting it as a fact of life, you know, the whole point of the story? Not anymore, fucko. Oh sure, they apparently filmed that ending, which Roald Dahl was said to have been so moved by it made him cry, and I guess is lost media now since it was never released as an extra, but now it ends with a rogue witch just choosing to turn him back 'cause reasons, so I guess it just doesn't have a message now. What was the point of the story, Mr. Henson? Great question. You see, it was a movie about stuff happening. And alright, I can see where he was coming from. The original ending is very dark, but it's fucking real. It presents you with a representation for something so many kids seriously go through and gives them an optimistic spin they can view their worlds from. So what are they supposed to take away with this? That people will love you no matter what, but preferably, it'd be better if after you were paralyzed, the paralyzation fairy came around and made you better? God, it's like that scene where A-Train tells a kid he can teach him to outrun cancer except unironic. Jim, I get you are going for your patented whimsy here, but the implications are somehow way more offensive this way. Maybe for this one you should have just stuck to the puppets. So, never mind. Listen, it gives me no joy to talk down some Jim Henson puppet work. The guy and his studio were so ahead of his time, it's not even funny. Have you seen Dark Crystal? Have you seen David Bowie's Balls? The type of shit that man could pull off was absolutely out of this world. I've literally looked into how he did some of the puppet work he does for these movies just because I was curious, and I still can't believe it when I'm actually watching them. But I can believe this. Ooh, I can believe this very easily. Don't get me wrong, it's some fine puppet work for the time. I wouldn't say it's horrendous or anything, unlike this green screen effect, which is just woof. But you really start to notice it when they have the balls to intersplice this footage with real trained rats going across the screen. Like, oh yeah, those are totally the same thing. I couldn't even tell. Of course, I don't blame the Henson Company for them. I'm sure they were doing the best with what they had, but with the way this turned out, I'm honestly leaning towards saying this movie just wasn't made at the right time. Since the puppet work is ambitious at least, I'll give it that, but you can tell they're being extremely held back by, first of all, the size of these things, seeing as they had to be minuscule, which can't be easy for the puppeteer who has to try emoting through it, and secondly, as a result of it being so small, there's no workaround for, say, letting the grandma pick it up and talk to it, something she does several times in the book. No, there's gotta be a surface for a puppeteer to hide under, so whenever they're talking, you're sort of forced to notice the weird static framing of it all, like how they're always sitting awkwardly apart so one can sit on a table or something. Again, they were trying their damnedest here, and for some of the little things it works. Those split-second transitionary puppets when anyone's turning into mice, oh baby, those look clean. And everything with the Grand High Witch, just as disgusting as I imagined her. But this is the main effect you see for the longest time on screen, and I'm sorry, it never looks convincing. If only they'd waited to do it with some more modern tech, it could've looked great. I feel a weird sense of dread right now, and I'm not sure why. But hey, who needs good effects when you've got good characters, huh? Rhetorical question, obviously, since I sure wouldn't know judging by this movie. And aside from the ending, this is what I'm the most torn up about, since I loved the characters in the book, especially the grandma, though I think she's probably everyone's favorite character, and for good reason. She's an extremely distinct guardian. You know, normally in these types of stories, the guardian figure doesn't believe the kids, and it ends up taking so long to convince them you want to just drink some mouse maker potion and head for a school, but not Grandmama. She's on that shit from the beginning as a proud Norwegian who grew up with it, and you never get that vibe of hysteria from her either, since she's just so matter-of-fact about it. You could even say it was her main defining character trait, how to the point and reasonable she was, or as reasonable as someone who'd offer their grandkid a puff of their cigar could be, which I'd say is pretty reasonable and funny, no matter what my parole officer says. So Henson, where did that all go? Why get rid of that aspect and make her less unique like that? It doesn't do anything new for the story to turn her into less of a stone-cold badass, it just makes her more generic. And they do the same thing to so many other characters too. The main kid's not as clever anymore, the other kid who gets turned into a mouse, Bruno, isn't rude anymore, meaning he's basically just fat now, and the relationship between the main kid and Grandmama isn't nearly as strong, since, like I said, they rush past the opening, which had most of the moments that established their bond. And that relationship is supposed to be the bedrock of the story, so without it, the whole thing inherently feels like it's missing something, and the new ending just reinforces that. I still want to give it props for the effects that look great and the pure dementedness it can capture, but I'm sorry to say, this was disappointing for me, though not as disappointing as... And I'm not talking about during this watch through, I mean when I went to see it in theaters as it was coming out, since I had some big expectations at the time, and could you really blame me? It was a Spielberg-directed Disney film from the writer of E.T. with a John Williams score based on a book by one of my favorite book-to-movie authors. Everything was pointing to this being a banger, and I wish I could tell you how my expectations were crushed when I went to see it, but I don't actually remember the experience of watching it. I remember seeing commercials for it that got me hyped, I remember getting my Nana to take me to see it, I remember sitting on her porch after watching it, but I have no recollection of me being in the theater watching the movie, even though I know I did, and for the longest time I wasn't quite sure why that was, but after watching it again I realized, oh,
It's probably because I was bored and stopped paying attention after a while. Since Jesus fuck, this thing is boring. Like, it's almost 2 hours long, and you feel every single minute of it. Though, believe it or not, it's not for the possible reason I mentioned before of the dialogue not being engaging enough, since they actually remove most of the dialogue for either new conversations or purely visual storytelling, both of which equally kinda suck, but the root of the problem isn't as much the method they use for storytelling as what they do to BFG and Sophie, who've both been changed, I guess for the sake of modernizing them? But all it does is make them both way more annoying, unlikable, and pretty much as incompatible as possible personality-wise, which is shocking to me because I thought the appeal of their dynamic was really easy to understand. Sophie is a timid girl with strong convictions, while the BFG is jolly and open, but doesn't have as much of that fight in him. So while BFG gets Sophie to open up to him with his big emotions and spirit, Sophie gets BFG to stand up to the giants through showing she can do it too despite being way smaller, exemplified in how she not only gets the queen to help, but also takes down Flesh Lump Eater using the pin of her brooch to make him think he was bit by a snake. I mean, it's not that hard to get a grip of, it's just a classic polar opposites bringing out the best in each other's story used to some great effect. So the idea of changing one of them into something else, let alone both, seems like a bad idea from the start, and what do you know? This movie proves that. Since first of all, for some stupid reason, they decide to make Sophie an independent, responsible small adult, which... no? What the fuck? That's not Sophie's character at all? The whole reason the story works in the first place is that Sophie's too shy to run from the BFG, so when he doesn't eat her, she finds room to ask questions and becomes friends with him. But when Sophie's proactive enough not to waste time, well, she doesn't do that. She keeps trying to run away, making her relationship with BFG seem way less like two kindred spirits getting mixed up together by circumstance, and more like Belle trying to escape the Beast Tower until she learns to live with it. And it doesn't help when BFG isn't his normal jolly self in favor of something I can only describe as Grandpa doesn't want to play right now, seeing as neither the character nor the actor seem like they want to be there. Now, I get that just like Pam Ferris, it's a bit unfair to compare the performance here to something as iconic as David Jason in the original movie, but when you look at the two side by side, it's way too hard not to notice how much life and whimsy is completely missing here. And Mark Rylance doesn't have the excuse of being too old or something, since he was in his mid-50s when he did this. It's not like he was physically incapable of putting a little energy in, especially for a character like BFG whose whole defining thing is that he's a big, friendly giant with big-ass emotions. He should be hamming it up like he's doing Shakespeare, but he treats it like Johnny Cash singing Hurt. It's miserable. In fact, the whole movie's miserable. Sophie's new assertiveness makes her cranky and loud and confrontational whenever she talks to BFG. BFG treats her presence like he's looking after a dog he doesn't want to play with, and then there's all these other decisions that just give the thing this gloomy, depressing aura. Like, for no reason at all, they choose to make it canon that BFG actually has taken a kid who saw him before like he does with Sophie, and what's worse, they also confirm he died, which... what? I guess the idea was to give some more tragedy to BFG as a character, make it so he's conflicted about getting close to Sophie since the Giants got one of his kid friends before and so on, but that kinda makes him look way fucking worse knowing he's actively putting Sophie in danger like that. You know, in the book, it's simple. He thinks she's gonna blab about his existence and get him put in a cage, so he decides she has to live with him to keep her from doing that. It was a cute sort of logic that told you how simple-minded but innocent he is. It did not include a bit where he's already done this before and knows what could happen, but chooses to do it again anyway for reasons that seem way more flimsy and selfish with that experience in mind. And weirdly, that's not the only time they make BFG look bad, because okay, in the book, it's explained BFG likes collecting passing dreams so he can cook up good fantasies and give them to kids while they sleep. And that info becomes important later when Sophie decides they need the queen's help to take on the other giants and decides to make her a bad dream of children being eaten. And Dahl makes it a point that these dreams are some harrowing shit to go through. It's basically tantamount to torture. And that's why BFG likes to seal them away when he catches them so kids don't have to suffer. So why does he use one to mess with Sophie here? I could see some people argue that him being distant from the death of the kid and all means he's not exactly out of character, he just needs Sophie to bring out that more whimsical side of him, which she kinda does over the film. But what's the excuse here? This is actively malicious and mean. BFG would not do that to Sophie. Why would you get him to do that, Steven? What, you're gonna be eyebrow-raisingly accurate about the fart rocket scene, but you're not gonna keep the bit about the big friendly giant being a big friendly giant? Seriously? And the ending, oh my god, the ending. So originally, it ends with this big happy moment where BFG gets to live next to Buckingham Palace with Sophie, he earns the official title of Royal Dreamblower of England and everyone loves him. It's about as upbeat an ending as Dahl's ever written, and the film decides to say, nope, now Sophie's adopted by the Queen, but she can never see BFG ever again because why can't he visit her anytime he wants when the Queen already knows of his existence and he can travel the Earth in hours? Fuck you, that's why. Legitimately, I have no clue what the writer's problem is, but they need to sort it out somewhere else. Ma'am, this is a whimsical fantasy movie. You gotta have whimsy. I wanna have a good time, and you're soiling it. And as if they couldn't have done anything else to make the viewing experience worse, there's the motion capture. Or well, I should be saying just the idea of making this a live-action animation hybrid at all, since really the thing that ties it all together is the believability of Sophie and BFG's relationship. And for their relationship to feel genuine, they need to be interacting in a way that looks like they're interacting with each other. There's gotta be loads of eye contact, BFG lifting Sophie up to talk to her, that sort of thing. But I don't believe for a second that this CGI creature and the real girl playing Sophie are even on the same plane, let alone looking at each other. The effect just doesn't work, and in a film like this, where if the effect works determines if you can feel the humanity of their bond or not, it comes off empty and fake, no matter how much realism you give him through motion capture, which, by the way, you shouldn't want to do to him. BFG's an excitable guy. Give him some pep. Stop trying to make him an old man, Steven. And actually, so much of this is animated already. Why not just make a straight-up animated movie again? That way, Sophie could look like she's, looking at BFG and not a couple inches off to the side all the time. Just a thought. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting you to get so angry with this. Like I was saying, it's a pretty boring movie, but man, I just can't let it slide how they massacred my boy. And there's 3 more movies to go after this. Fuck me. Guys, I don't think I've ever just known how bad of a time I was in from the very beginning than when this opened with Chris Rock doing the narration. Chris Rock! Out of all the people to narrate a Roald Dahl story, and not just regular Chris Rock, no, modern Chris Rock. So he's not trying to speak like a Roald Dahl character, he's speaking like when he narrates an episode of Everybody Hates Chris. And look, I'm into Chris Rock, I think he's a funny comedian, but having him narrate a Roald Dahl story is like getting Robin Williams for Grave of the Fireflies. I mean, it's funny, yeah, but not for any other reasons you intended. And God, if that wasn't a great tone setter, since this movie does not give a fuck about being accurate to anything. Shit, I don't think the people who wrote it even read the book. I'm pretty sure the only reference they had for this was the original movie, which, in case you forgot, already wasn't a good adaptation. And now it's set in the South for like zero reason. It's a mess, but it is an interesting mess, because there are just so many inexplicable, unnecessary changes for something that clearly isn't trying to improve shit in basically any tangible way. And I'm kind of shocked to say that, since like BFG 2016, this had some serious power behind it. Robert Zemeckis, Guillermo del Toro, Alfonso Cuarón, there's enough talent here to make any cinephile shit themselves. And supposedly this was going for a more accurate take on the book, so it should have been set up for success, but like I said, that assertion's bullshit. This isn't closer to the book, at least by much. Really, the only thing it changes for the better is the ending. But I don't care how accurate the ending is, that doesn't change the fact they had no idea what they were doing. Like in the DVD extras, there's this short they did about the influence of Roald Dahl on the script, but there's almost nothing they say about the witches in particular other than the ending. They don't mention the characters, they don't talk about the relationship between MC and his badass grandmama at the root of the story. It's all just the same empty platitudes of Roald Dahl is dark, and he doesn't talk down to kids, and blah blah blah. You watch the start of this video, you know what I'm talking about. It almost comes off intentionally vague just to hide how much they didn't know the source material, but it comes through in the final film because just like a kid who thinks they can write a book report by just watching a movie instead, there's certain things here that only the 90s movie did. So if you really read the book and wanted to do something closer to that, why are these framed exactly like they were done there? Stuff like introducing the Grand High Witch before she shows up in the meeting room, MC talking to his pet mice after he becomes one, Grandmama having a beef with Grand High Witch when they're supposed to have never met before, giving Grand High Witch a cat that guards her mouse maker potion, the mouse kids getting around the house on a mini rocket ship track. Fuck, even the way he pours the potion into the witch's soup is the same. This is so unmistakably taken from the 90s movie and only the 90s movie. Why are they even trying to call it Roald Dahl's The Witches and all this other performative shit like it's his true vision when they obviously couldn't be arsed to read his book in the first place. Like, guys, it's not that long. It's a barely 200-page children's book. You can read it in an afternoon. I would know. This is dumb. This is so incredibly dumb. Who decided this? I bet it was the same guy who made all these stupid changes, wasn't it? I could totally imagine someone that lazy coming into a writer's room being asked how they can shake up the formula and just going, Chris Rock. But, the story's set in England with a Norwegian family. Then put it in the South this time. Damn. Well, why would we do that from, like, a story perspective? Are you not listening to Have Chris Rock? And before anyone tries to say it, this is very different from Matilda. Matilda's transition from being set in Britain to America was a super seamless one that had all the perfect analogs to make it feel natural. You might not have even noticed if you weren't thinking about it. This, on the other hand, is a major shift, since one of the grandma's main things is that she's proud of being Norwegian. It's also why she knows about witches, because they've been a major part of Norwegian culture for literal centuries. America doesn't have that sort of analog. Sure, we had witch trials too, but that was just for a couple months 300 years ago in Massachusetts, and this is set in Louisiana. And also, it doesn't really make sense that they'd all gather for a convention there when England was the capital of witch trials and activity throughout all of history. It's a completely arbitrary switch-up that doesn't do anything for the story except give some slight nods to racism when the white hotel owners are shocked Grandmama's not the staff. Oh, and speaking of Grandmama, she's just not the same character anymore. I'll give the film this, they do a better job at building up her and MC's relationship before getting to the hotel, but there's nothing in Octavia Spencer's performance or character writing that reminds you in any way of the original. She's not chill, badass, proud of where she came from, occasionally forgetful or solemn. No, she's just playing an extremely typical Southern black grandmother. She's playing it well since it's Octavia Spencer, but that's all she does. Although there is a lingering question there when you wonder, why is Octavia Spencer playing Grandmama? She's supposed to be in her 70s or 80s. Octavia Spencer was barely 50 when she did this. That's not grandma age. If you were gonna cast her for the role and not have any allusions to the original, why not just say she's an aunt or something so it makes sense? It's probably a lost cause trying to make sense of this movie's creative choices. Just look at Anne Hathaway. Ugh, what were they thinking? And by the way, that wasn't an this is gross reaction, that was an who approved of this reaction. Cause who approved of this? I get Robert Zemeckis is big on doing weird CGI effects and all, but if he's gonna do them, shouldn't they look, I don't know, visually appealing? I mean, the original Grand High Witch is already such a high standard to live up to. It's a great piece of practical effects work that proves the mouse puppets weren't the best that team could do. So you've really gotta put some effort in to try topping that, and the best idea Zemeckis apparently had was giving them all Kakihara's mouth from Ichi the Killer, and hey, I appreciate the reference. Not enough people talk about the works of Hideo Yamamoto outside the Takashi Miike film, but is this really the best place to be putting that? And why does it somehow look worse than that despite coming out 20 years later with a $100 million budget? I don't get that. And actually, all these new ideas for how the witches look just seem to be there to show off an effect that instantly looks dated. Like, was there a reason to give them all claw hands, or the Grand High Witch a one-toed foot? These all seem pretty terrible as ideas, guys. You're not doing yourselves any favors by showing off just how bad your CG is, and oh boy, do we get a lot of it. I wouldn't say it's all terrible, the mice effects are decent enough for what they are, but aside from that, it's not looking too hot, Chief. I know I said the 90s movie was too early for the tech that was needed to tell this story, but I think this one might have been made after the point that tech would look good, since Disney wasn't overworking every VFX studio to pump out shit for their next Marvel slop Disney Plus show. I'd say the window for making a good witches movie was around 1999 to 2005. You know, that's when they were working with that Stuart Little technology, getting their CGI mouse mechanics down, but that time's passed, so this is probably the best we're gonna get. Yay!
If you want to view paradise.
Whoa, but Braxton, that's not an adaptation of anything. It's an original prequel. Yeah, I know. I'm aware that technically speaking, this isn't an adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but it is trying to represent the characters and world related to that story with its own. So I feel like it's only fair I judge how well it does that. And I'm gonna be real with you, it's fucking trash. Like, I can't understand why Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory gets all the slack for being a quote-unquote bad adaptation, when this is literally right here waving its badly contorted hands in your face. Granted, I can get how you might not initially see that. The first time I went to see it, I hadn't seen the original film in years, so I thought it was fine, but
It was doing this video and looking at every other version of this that I realized this is about as gentrified as you could make the image of Willy Wonka. If he were a real person who actually existed, this would be his Bohemian Rhapsody, a cleaned up, squeaky clean look at a life through the eyes of a typical rags to riches story thanks to his incredible talent that doesn't mention any of the complexity him or his characters rightfully should have. And just to clarify real quick, I am talking about this specifically as an adaptation of Wilder's take on Wonka, since that's obviously where all the pandering's coming from. They've got the purple suit, the brown hat, Timothy Chalamet sorta looks like a young Gene Wilder, they've got a whole fucking motif for pure imagination they play in the background constantly, so that's how I'm judging it character-wise. Although, in case you were wondering, it's not a good prequel for the book character either, since while it's definitely closer than Wilder's take, there's still a few things that set them apart. One, Wonka wasn't a stupid, naive sentimentalist. He was eccentric and excitable, but he was still a businessman who knew when to take things seriously. Two, he didn't do any of the fake-ass whimsical bullshit Chalamet does. Anything whimsical he did was extremely natural. And what was the last one? Oh yeah, 3, he didn't do fucking magic. I mean, I understand how it can seem that way with just how fantastical everything about him is, but there's a big difference between a Candyman who can do unbelievable things and a sorcerer. In the books and movies, he's a Candyman. We don't know all the particulars of how he does it, since that just adds to the mystique of him as a character, but we can tell it's the work of a mad scientist. In Wonka, though, it's explicitly stated he uses clouds and lightning if need be, and travels to imaginary wonderlands to get his magical ingredients. Like, that's not Willy Wonka, that's Edward Elric. You might as well call Lord Shin from Kung Fu Panda 2 a wizard, since no one there can fathom how a canon works. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the character on a conceptual level, and that's not even talking about him compared to Wilder's Wonka. Like, at this point, you should have a good idea of his character, right? Sly and slippery, quick-witted, controlled, putting on a mask to make him seem normal so no one expects it when he goes crazy for shits and giggles. It's an iconic performance with a lot of depth to it, and Chalamet's version isn't. He isn't putting on a mask to trick people, no, he just is a quirky, whimsical magic man who loves making chocolate, not because he's obsessed with it, because his poor old mama used to make him a bar once a year for his birthday, and after she died, he wanted to open his own little factory, since she said she'd be there to see it. Pepperidge Farms, remember? It's pure Hollywood musical biopic level kitsch at its most sickly sweet, and I fucking hate it, since it turns Wonka from basically anything competent or interesting into a total parody of himself, complete with an intentionally self-aware origin story full of nudges and little winks to the camera that's still, at the end of the day, a very by-the-numbers origin story. Okay, see, he's a small-town country boy who comes to the city with a buck to his name and a song in his heart, but gets tricked into debt by some evil landlords, making him team up with a group of equally quirky character actors, one of whom happens to be the niece of the even eviler Mafia Association who run the city from the shadows. You notice how much worse it is when you actually lay the thing out? It's not nearly as clever as it tries to think it is, and neither is their version of Wonka. He's pretty much what an adult who hasn't seen the old movie since they were a kid would assume the character was like, and I think that speaks to something a little more nefarious about this and certain modern doll adaptations in general, which, alright, considering the movie I'm talking about here must sound kinda weird, but trust me, I see it. It's hiding itself in plain sight to make it seem like it's not going on, but it is. And by it, I mean the sanding down and sterilizing of Roald Dahl stories to make them more marketable to a more modern audience. Because think about it. Let's look back on some of the other more modern adaptations I've talked about. Matilda the Musical inflated Mrs. Phelps' role to tell kids there's always an adult you should be willing to talk to. The Witches 2020 not only had Chris Rock just acting like modern Chris Rock, but even had a moment where Grandmama goes out of her way to say the girl she knew who got taken by a witch did the one thing you should never do: take candy from a stranger, because obviously that wasn't spelled out well enough already. Then there's the BFG switching up Sophie's role to make her more assertive out of nowhere while playing down how the other giants eat kids all the time, and well, finally, there's this. A movie that completely wipes over Willy Wonka as a character to make him as spotless as they can for the sake of shameless nostalgic pandering. So he didn't find the Oompa Loompas in the jungle and pay them in cocoa beans to work for him. There was, a little Hugh Jackman Loompa who made a deal with Wonka to work at his factory. It's all above board, see? And Wonka wasn't, well, a trickster or anything. He was just a small, whittle, beanie, tumbler sexy man who needed someone to teach him how to read. Aw, isn't he precious? And the tone? Why, what's that about dark undertones? Children being left alone to fend off severe cruelties they'll naturally have to face in their real lives, like abusive family members, unfair teachers, and snot-nosed brats who think they're better than you? Like hell, just take out the darkness and add even more whimsy, dumbass. When life doesn't give you eggs, you put even more sugar in that cake. They'll never notice the difference. Oh, but actually though, there is one more movie that encapsulates this bastardization of Dahl more than anything, since at least on its own, Wonka is not a great movie, but a decently produced one. Sure, their version of Pure Imagination makes me want to tear my ears out for how it butchers that song and takes out all its sincerity, but the new songs are okay. The production design's nice. There's some talent on board here. You could turn your brain off and have a fun time with it. But you couldn't for what's coming up, though.
Oh, nice. Lovely.
The Twits. How do I sum up the Twits? Yeah, I'd say that about covers it. The Twits is... Fuck, I don't even know what I'm supposed to say about it. It's kinda incomprehensible just how bad this is. It might genuinely be one of the worst movies I have ever seen. And for the record, I'm not saying that as like a cartoon reviewer with no understanding of what kinds of shit is out there. I watch other movies. I try to make sure I don't put myself in a bubble with the entertainment media I try to consume, but still, this is one of the worst things I have ever been forced to sit through, and I guess I can't blame that entirely on the people who made it, since there was famously a lot of production trouble with this spanning 2 decades, which makes sense, seeing as first of all, it careens between plot beats so much it could only come from a script that spent years and years getting rewritten, but also, secondly, parts of it don't even look finished. Most of it is okay, I'd say a good 70 to 80% of it looks alright enough, but there's also way too much of this that I could reasonably assume wasn't completely finished, whether it was on a lighting level, compositing, cleanup, whatever stage of production it missed, there's something clearly unfinished here. Does that have anything to do with how the studio animating it shut down 7 months before it came out? I don't know, but I'm willing to make a guess here. How is it as an adaptation? Terrible. The Twits is a short book about 2 people who play pranks on each other because they hate everyone. It's a fine book, but it's not really apt for a film adaptation. It gives way more TV special energy. So for a 90-minute feature, they just decided, fuck it, let's do whatever. So now the plot isn't mainly about the Twits, it's about these 2 orphan siblings called Misha and Bubsy, who, and I believe I'm getting this right, see the Twits doing bad things that stops one of them from getting adopted, and out of a want to make the people in the city less bad, go after them, assuming that with their capture, people will become more nice? But then it's not about that, because the Twits are using magical monkeys called Mugglewumps from Loopaland, since I guess they're doing some sort of Roald Dahl cinematic universe now, who cry magic tears to power their homemade amusement park, Twitland, so Misha and Bubsy help them escape. And before you ask, no, none of those things were in the book. There were monkeys the Twits kept as pets, one of which was named Mugglewump, but they were not magic, they didn't cry energy tears, you couldn't talk to them if you were just an empath, and they didn't have the ability to do whatever they're doing in this scene. So is the movie about the Mugglewumps? Kinda? The Twits decide they're gonna run for office next and take them back with the power of the town, and so Misha Muska Mickey Mouse has to save them while grappling with whether she might be a Twit herself deep down. And I'm not gonna lie, from there, I sort of tuned the thing out to hopefully minimize the brain damage this was so obviously causing me. I mean, it's just a blur of weird magic, uncomfortable scenes, annoying characters with dumb voices. For some reason, the narrator is a flea reading a bedtime story to her kid in Mr. Twit's beard, and sometimes she's telling it from the future, while other times she's in the story presently as it's being told. I don't know, and I sure as fuck don't know what this has to do with the Twits, who become secondary characters to orphans getting mothered by a blue monkey with the voice of Natalie Portman. All I do know is that it's an LSD, sugar-fueled ADHD nightmare that doesn't have any resemblance to Dahl, or anything even slightly resembling coherent for that matter, and the only reason I'm saying it's lower than Wonka is cause while that might not know how to tell a Roald Dahl story, this doesn't know how to do anything. May it burn in hell along with the Netflix executives that greenlit it, and may the film prints it was made on be cast into the sea never to be seen again. Not sure how to transition from there. So that was every Roald Dahl adaptation, and to be really frank with you guys, probably the least painful experience I've had making one of these to date. Oh yeah, sure, there was some dog shit in there, and seeing as most of them came out in the last few years, I don't know what that says about Dahl films going forward, but for the most part, these were inventive, fun, unique, and showed an impressive range of ways to make not just a good adaptation, but a generationally amazing one. Like, some of these are gonna be in the fucking history books for how well they translate their material from one medium to another. It's insane just how consistently these get passionate, interesting voices on board to bring them to life, and even with some of the worst of them, they weren't exactly terrible movies, they were just bad adaptations, except for you go die! Honestly, I couldn't tell you what direction these movies are going in if I tried, since they've just always had such unending diversity it's kind of impossible to say. Does that speak to the infinite timeless adaptability of Dahl's stories and messages? Who can say? But I'll say one thing.